Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining me, and thank you especially to all of my patrons and channel members. I have a special guest with me today, a new guest, John Thomas. Welcome, John Thomas.
Hi, thank you for having me on the show. This is my pseudonym. Um, I'm doing this because I want to do Twitter activism and be able to say things without regard for person. And so Kelly and I, we've enjoyed each other's comments sometimes, and so we might have an interesting analysis of Calvinism. I hope.
You hope what?
Oh, I hope we'll have an interesting analysis.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I thought you
Yes.
started a new sentence there. I thought maybe you choked on something or something. Okay, we have a question for you right off the bat. Where did John Thomas find his lipstick and eyeshadow? And I wonder what the Calvinists think of that depiction. He'd fit right into our community, don't you think?
Well, I found this picture on the internet, and I hope it makes for a strong brand.
Okay. And John Thomas, sorry, is a member of our community. The John Thomas depiction is satire. How did you come on the name John Thomas?
I wanted good, strong Christian names that would work together as a first name and a last name, while both being first names. And so, there's only so many Matthew Marks and such that you can do, and I felt it important to include Doubting Thomas. I also wanted a reference to when John Calvin launched the Institutes of the Christian Religion. So 1536 is that year. Dismal turning point, arguably.
Okay. To me, the name brings up a connotation of a science fiction book that I read decades ago, and I don't remember the name of the book. But it's about this kid. He's probably an older teen, and he has a pet, and his pet is an alien, and this alien has been in his family for generations. And near the end of the book, the alien takes him to his home planet and is reporting back to his boss and says, this human is my pet. I've been raising John Thomases now for generations. And it was interesting to see the turnabout that the pet always thought of the guy that, he's always thought of the alien as the pet, and the alien always thought of him as the pet.
Oh, yes, there's some of that in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, too.
Is that where I got that from?
Possibly.
Okay.
But not really sure. But yeah, in that case, the mice turn out to actually be alien overlords, and the dolphins turn out to actually be the smartest species on Earth, smarter even than humans, and so they get out right before it's destroyed.
I read Hitchhiker's Guide probably about 40 years ago. I don't really remember it.
The essential atheist elements, I think, are adequately conveyed even by the movie.
Oh, now when I read it, I was a believer. So any atheist elements would have gone completely over my head at that time.
Okay, so Douglas Adams, his contribution to atheism, to atheist culture, is the main point probably is that the concept of the puddle, the mud puddle that dries up in the sun, and the whole time that it's drying up, it marvels that that the hole in the ground that it's in is shaped exactly like it is. It must have been designed for it to be there, and then it dries up in the sun, and maybe that's something we should think about for ourselves.
Okay, so that's where the puddle analogy originated, huh?
Yes. So there's that, and then there's the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which is fantastic. You can go a while unpacking it as an analogy for Christianity, especially if you can picture more of his background closer to the Church of England, that particular branch of the Reformation.
Okay.
Semi-Calvinists.
Okay. Sandy says, if I misgendered you, John, please forgive me. But John, you identify as male, correct?
Yes, there.
Okay.
I have no reason to complicate that. So I'm cisgendered, straight male.
Okay. Okay. There's a question that I kind of wanted to open the show with that I just came up with about 15 minutes ago. And I came up with the question while watching the evening news. And I want to give a trigger warning to the audience that we're going to go now into a short discussion about current events, and specifically some of the more horrific current events that have occurred in the last 24 hours. So if this is disturbing for you, you might want to tune away for about the next 5 minutes. That being said, one of the things that really struck me as I was watching the news and watching what a horrific situation this school shooting was at Robb Elementary, thinking about how so many believers justify genocide. They justify the murder of children. When I asked them about all of the innocent that were murdered in the cleansing of Canaan, in the destruction of the firstborn of Egypt, in the flood, how do they justify God killing all these innocent children? And the answer is always, well, God can do whatever he wants to. At which, to me, for one thing, this is one aspect, and I'm going to bring it up, but it's not the one I want to go to first. We'll get to it second, which is how can morality be absolute if God is an exception to the absolute morality? But first, I want to look at, how can it be morally acceptable for God to do this? And the question I would want to bring to believers, and I realize you are not a believer, but I'm going to bring it up anyway, is if that was not the gunman that it was, if that was Jesus, if Jesus took an AR-15 and walked into an elementary school and shot every child in the school, would your reaction be, well, that was his right. He's God. He can do whatever he wants to.
That's a really important question because I'm afraid it's going to come home and is coming home in the real world all the time. If you're familiar with the exact name of this gun cult that we have in the United States, both in general and in particular extreme cases one may think of, but they I am so sorry. I lost my train of thought. Could you restate the end of the question?
The end of the question was if Jesus walked into an elementary school with an AR-15 and shot every child in the school, would
Yeah.
a believer find that morally acceptable because it's God?
And the answer to that is that it depends on the believer. And Calvinism is designed to select a certain type of believer and exclude others. It's designed to select a kind of believer who's okay with living in a universe that is a totally hierarchical and extremely unequal dictatorship at the end of the plot, where where some vessels are created for glory and some for destruction, and the ones that are created for destruction will be in a great majority by almost every Calvinist interpretation. And the only way to get out of that as a Calvinist is to become a Universalist and say, okay, there's a redemptive plot that continues after the point of judgment, and that's the point of having been sanctified by Christ so that you can follow in his footsteps and to carry on the work for as long as it takes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that exactly is the point that broke my faith, because I was a Calvinist and I did exactly what you said. Once I went, when I, for the first time, looked at what that faith meant to the unbeliever instead of just looking at what it meant to the believer, I suddenly realized that it, God cannot be just in that theology. And I did exactly what you said. I went to universalism.
Yeah, and I would just point out, the Book of Revelation says that Jesus is going to come back at some point with either a sword or an AR-15, by some interpretations, in his mouth and shoot a bunch of kids dead because they weren't part of his Book of Life.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
Calvinism is it's that callous about it, and it promotes a certain culture, and it is no surprise that what we have seen also in recent days from the Southern Baptist Convention, 12 men at the top of this hierarchy had hundreds of women coming to them over the years with horror stories about pastors sexually misbehaving, and in some cases dozens of individual women per pastor, and the whole time they did absolutely nothing about it. They lied about it practically every way you can imagine, and they said we can't we can't make a list, we can't touch this because that would open us up to legal liability because we touched it.
Mm-hmm.
um, and so
Except
they
they did.
Except they did. They made a list, and they didn't make an internal list to actually map out the problem. Instead, what they did was they made an external list of where it had showed up in the press, so that they could see how they stacked up in the big picture compared to other churches.
Mm-hmm.
And that list, which is due to be released once they scrub it for personally identifying victims information. That list is not even like it's not even going to be anywhere close to complete. It's got hundreds of people on it. It's nowhere close to complete because it's only made up of people who were caught and written up in the press.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's mainstream media press.
Mm-hmm.
It's some it's the Christianity Today deserves praise when it does good reporting on stuff like this, because that is not always the case,
Yeah.
but they do sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And they did a good job of covering the scandal with Ravi Zacharias as well.
Yes, I wasn't quite that woke, so to speak, at the time when that was rolling out.
Mm-hmm. Um, so I assume you were raised in a believing home?
Yes, I was, and
Okay.
the Calvinism was a little bit by accident.
Oh, okay.
Dad was a dad grew up a United Methodist, which
Okay.
is mainstream center right Protestant. Um, they hew I think they were abolitionists fairly readily,
Mm-hmm.
but they still adopted some of the Calvinist theology of around human sinfulness, although they took a different angle on whether we can actually do anything about it of our own initiative, or whether we just have to gumption Jesus all the way to the end.
Mm-hmm. Now, I converted to Calvinism from Arminianism, gosh, about halfway through my Christian journey.
Oh,
And
that's so interesting. Sorry, love to hear about that.
oh, well, the thing that really appealed to me was the intellectualism. The pastor that okay, I was at a Baptist church, and my closest friend at that church moved to another church and was telling me how great this other church was. So I tried this other church, and I was very impressed with um, well, like I said, intellectual everything was. He was always saying, you need a deeper faith, you need a deeper understanding of the scriptures, you need to dig into what all of this really means. And he recommended books. He recommended Mark Knoll, Tim Keller, John Piper, and Wayne Grudem. And when I started reading these books, these were all very difficult things to read. I needed a dictionary with me, and so I said, hey, these must be very intelligent people if they can write like this. And so I bought it all hook, line, and sinker because I just assumed these people were so much smarter than me. And while you respond to that, I'm going to put up my avatar for just a moment and go turn on a fan because it's getting very uncomfortably hot in here with all the lights.
Wow, that was so interesting because I had a sort of a similar process, I guess, at a much earlier age. The Calvinism, I would say, so mom and dad had different backgrounds, and they're not together anymore, and they struggled to be together at the time, and so we went from church to church in a lot of cases, and the only places where we could stay were churches like where mom grew up, which were hyper conservative Reformed Baptist in small town Indiana. Just picture some movie where people in Indiana are proud of being Rudy. Picture that, anything like that. So
this was in Indiana.
This was in Indiana and other places. But anyway, so they couldn't agree on churches until they landed in a hyper conservative Calvinist church, and so eventually we did. And at the same time, mom was homeschooling us, and most I don't know if you know this, but most of the homeschooling resource organizations in the country, that market and market share are largely but not entirely composed of far right Christian extremist propaganda. Mm-hmm. That's mostly all what it is. Mm-hmm. And so we've got these catalogs that are just nothing but propaganda and selections, narrowly tailored selections from history. And so, some of it was interesting, and I soaked it up. And, I had an emotional need to justify the decisions that my parents were making homeschooling, because I could see it was just completely obvious to me intuitively that what a kid needs in the 21st century is a facility with meeting new people and with turning over the people in their life efficiently and courageously and resourcefully. And for that, at least on the face of things, homeschooling is about the last thing you would want to do. Mm-hmm. Because that creates a burden. Then it puts the burden on you to artificially create the environment where they can get the kind of socialization that they need, and won't end up just personality sliding into idiosyncrasy on the internet. With the whole lack of structure in their lives that the conservatives are so worried about.
That was one thing that was interesting when I showed when I moved from the Baptist church to the Calvinist church, my two oldest children, one was a senior in high school and the other was a sophomore in high school, and they had been in that church since they were very small children, and they had close friends in that church, and they really didn't want to leave that church. And so I said it was okay, they could stay at that church while I moved to the new church with Robin, my youngest, who was just a baby at the time. And I forgot where I was. Oh, I know. When I showed my oldest a picture of a group of children from the church, she said, I can tell you exactly which children in that picture are homeschooled just from the way that they're dressed.
Oh, yes, very often. Basically, there's 3 levels of homeschooled, and the high functioning secular parent homeschoolers, that group, that lot, they are going to be disproportionately in the first tier of homeschooling, where you can't necessarily tell, and if they tell you, it probably makes them more interesting because the relationship has progressed a little bit more, and you didn't know. Mm-hmm. And then there's a second tier where once you start getting to know them, at some point you put together, oh, maybe they were homeschooled, and it all makes more sense. And then there's a third level where you can just see the personality effects of the the artificial culture barrier that was erected. Like artificial Berlin walls built between the children of this country by their parents intentionally to indoctrinate them.
Mm-hmm. Well, to keep them in the faith, you don't want them wandering away.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and there's so many things about so many developments about that we've learned about the universe in the last 150 years that just show the inadequacy of our former myth-based ways of understanding the cosmos.
Mm-hmm.
And not everything has been like that. Once it was discovered that there was some kind of Big Bang or singularity at the beginning of the universe, that swung. That's a significant weight of intuition on the prior probability of whether there's a God or not. I don't think it's decisive in any way, because we still have the same problem, which is what Percy Shelley, I think, said best, is that we know that every cause has to have an effect, and there must have been some cause for us to be here, but we can only infer causes. A cause is exactly adequate to the effects.
Okay.
And there's no adequacy that you're adding to the explanation of the universe by inferring the Abrahamic God, by normalizing the Abrahamic God, and that is what Calvinism does.
There was a comment here from Drew Harrison that I wanted to bring up, and I've been intentionally holding off on it because I wanted to actually discuss it and not just show it on the screen. And that was, he says, my great-grandfather was forced to resign as pastor of my parents' church before I was born for teaching Calvinism. And then he further commented, my grandmother once said of the Reverend, Daddy wasn't abusive, he just didn't know how hard he hit us, which is really sad. But that can be true even in a secular home. I mean, my dad was abusive and he wasn't religious.
It can be, but Calvinism says that if your child presents you with Calvinism says, the Bible says, there will always be a way of escape for you, which means there will always be a right answer for you. It disregards the possibility that we can be in dilemmas, which are situations where there is no answer that's maybe good there, and maybe all the answers are kind of suck, and we still need a rational way to process that and work with it. Calvinism says no. We have to. I lost that train of thought. I do apologize.
That's okay. One thing that you made me think of when you mentioned that, and if this brings back your train of thought, let me know, is we were always taught as Calvinists to have a high view of God and a low view of man. And now that I'm no longer a believer, I find that absolutely abhorrent, the way that Calvinists will say that all humans are deserving of death. And I realize that when they say that, they picture adults. And I never thought about the fact that when you say that all humans, and you say that original sin attaches at birth, that babies are worthy of death from the moment they are born, that just doesn't even make any sense. And I've even asked a couple Calvinists point blank, do you think that your children are worthy of death? And I've been absolutely abhorred that some of them say, yeah, they are.
My mom has told me that her dad said that basically, or very close to it, about me at when he saw me at my birth, was, oh, well, here's another despicable, no good sinner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So
you have to wonder, how can anyone think that that's a good way to go through life?
And I guess I should not have been too surprised when I revisited the family library in recent years and found books redeeming the character of Klansmen and Confederates.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I mean, I always knew he was a big fan of Robert E. Lee and Stonewall
Hmm.
Jackson, but I thought it was just those two in particular, and
Hmm.
I didn't have a full awareness of the way the South laundered their personality after the after Reconstruction.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and you know it was fucking Jesus. It was Jesus H Christ on a stick is what they used to get to get a voting majority of the United States public on their side. And you know, with the cruelty that was ongoing in the American West, and with how we were poised to profit from all of that, there just was not the moral will to maintain the project of Reconstruction and see it through.
Hmm.
It would have needed another generation.
Now, I have to say that that is not universal in Calvinism, because the church that I went to was very inclusive and very accepting of people who were not within the church. And specifically, my pastor formed a partnership with a Black congregation in the central part of the city with the aim of trying to blend our two congregations, trying to find some way to get us to be get us both to be interracial churches. And it was a joint effort between the two pastors, although it never came to fruition, part mainly because all of us that attended the church, the white church, all lived near the white church, and the people who lived near the black church went to the black church, and the community was too divided by geographics to try to blend the two churches.
Yes, I've heard that before. So it's important for everybody who wants to be like the basic moral damage that I would say Calvinism does is it causes you to think that all of our relationships depend unilaterally from the top down, based on our relationship with the king of the universe.
Mhm.
There's a presupposition that the universe has a kingdom with a king. The king is immortal, and the main thing is to get a personal deal out of the faith that's coming to everyone else, and then to have a good relationship with the king.
Mhm. Mhm.
And like that's that is a worldview that was crafted from the raw material available in European feudalism, and
Mm.
it evolved for 150 years in the European wars of religion, which
Mhm.
the historians of the Third Reich, they will tell you that the Nazi Holocaust was only the second or third worst disaster that ever happened in the traditional history of Germany. The worst is actually the 30 Years' War, which was the end of the European wars of religion, and that was directly comparable to the bubonic plague in the terms of the social devastation that it caused. Uh, it is not very often that wars, even ancient wars, approached that level of human immiseration as a deadly pandemic, but this one did. Um, it really it shows all the extremes.
Now, I don't know much of the history of that war. Was that a traditional war that was, lines of soldiers shooting at each other, or was that more of a
It,
was there an intent to try to harm the civilian population as well?
it was very much like the behavior of the Russians in Ukraine today.
Okay.
Very much like that, except it dragged on for 150 years,
Oh,
and
wow.
it was sort of an inverse situation, because what happened was Germany was a large and diverse area, and it was part of the Holy Roman Empire, and the tensions of power within the Holy Roman Empire were such that various factions throughout Germany, and Germany has a Germany, so to speak. That's not what it is. It's a bunch of principalities in the Holy Roman Empire. But this is local power. This is local feudal power struggling with imperial power and new churches springing up and choosing sides. And at this point, the ideologies of Protestantism have had have had a number of decades to marinate and reflect on the escalating atrocities of the European wars of religion, which amounts to 150 years of political violence and religious civil war all over Europe. So what the 30 Years' War comes down to is the local power, the local elites they provoke some political violence they do the defenestration of Prague, which means they break into a tower where some functionaries from the Roman Church and the Holy Roman Empire are, and they throw them out the windows. And fortunately, this is actually, I think there's two defenestrations of Prague, and off the top of my head, I don't recall which one is the 30 Years' War. I think it's the second one. I think this had already happened, which is why they did it again as a provocative act.
Okay.
So that's something. That's the kind. If the Capitol riot happens again, that's the kind of thing we need to watch out for. So they provoke a conflict with the Holy Roman Empire, and they take advantage of the new technology of the printing press to control the news that their local populations are able to get. So the outcome in the end is that local regions of Germany are split up based on which factions of Protestants they're controlled by, and Protestants meaning local former feudal elites. So small town mayors, people at the level of mayors and dukes and so forth, they're fighting over Germany, and they have foreign benefactors. So everybody outside of Europe has some kind of interest in the balance of everybody else in Europe. That is, has an interest in the balance of power within Germany. So they're choosing sides too. All this based on politics. So this ideology, it's made from the raw material available coming out from the cultural inheritance of the Middle Ages, which is meager, I'll say, and it evolves to survive this crucible of conflict and devastation, unlike anything we can possibly imagine today. Including, that's when almost all the witch trials happened. It was during the Protestant Reformation. For most of the Middle Ages, the Catholic Church knew better. They actually undoubtedly did a controlled study at some point and said, hey, get me a representative sample of twins and of I want to interview all the people who might possibly be witches. We're going to figure out if there's anything to it, and we're going to know about it. And then they did that. They locked it away in their archives, and it's been proof of humanism all along. That's my speculation. So, like, I'm speculating. The Vatican is an institution that is designed to create a reservoir of long-term cultural power. That's what it's for, even if there's no God behind it, and everybody who's part of it knows that.
Now, Calvinism was originated with John Calvin, who was French, correct?
That's right.
And the French really didn't want anything to do with this upstart religion, and they exiled him, and he went to Geneva, Switzerland, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Interesting story. So he got to tap into what Jesus and John the Baptist said, or whoever it was, about how a prophet is not welcome in his own home.
Interesting. I had not thought of that.
Yeah. So just look at how just reimagine the whole story in the New Testament as just politics, because ideology is politics in this space. This is people making politics about about the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen.
Okay. Do you think John Calvin kind of thought of himself as almost the second coming?
I have not read him personally, and I should read a good deal of him before I start to draw that kind of conclusion. I should be able to balance that with what other people said about him who knew him.
Okay.
I would expect that he was a personality. Are you acquainted with Douglas Wilson?
No.
Douglas Wilson is the pastor of an extremely conservative Calvinist Presbyterian type church, Presbyterian being the Scottish branch
Right.
of
Right.
Calvinism. So they were further marked by the late the end medieval politics between Scotland and England, and it was complicated because Scotland was torn between Catholics on one side and extreme Protestants on the other, while the Church of England was trying to do moderate politics.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, what was your actual question? I think I sidestepped it.
I'm really trying to get to how Calvinism took root, since I wondered if Calvin might be thinking of himself as kind of a second coming of Jesus, from what you said about him drawing a parallel between the prophet not being welcomed in his own home, and Calvin not being welcomed in France and being exiled to Switzerland. But where I was actually going with it was to get into how Calvinism took root.
Well, I would say probably the man himself was persuasive, and
That makes
and he
sense.
and it's so it's important to think of this in terms of politics. It's
Hmm.
also important to think of it in terms of marketing.
Hmm.
And so Calvin provided a product that met a need, and he spoke to the pain points that people had. There were people who needed an ideology that was ultimately Machiavellian, an ideology that ultimately says, "Hey, whatever the hell has already happened was God's pre-planned plan from the beginning, and nothing was ever going to change it. And the things that are in the future are also like that too. We just don't know what they are yet, and we're counting on ourselves to be in among his favorites."
And that brings us exactly to today's topic. Is Calvinism self-refuting? Because this is the point of the theology that broke the theology for me, and yet it's essential to the theology itself, which is why I find it self-refuting. If the whole point is that before God created anything, God knew absolutely everything that was going to happen, and he preordained everything to happen in exactly that way. And don't be afraid, because God is completely in control. That would preclude man from having any kind of free will. And if man has no free will in what he does, he's only an actor on the stage doing what God has preset for him to do, then how can God justly condemn man for doing what he preordained man to do?
Well, of course, and that's what Christopher Hitchens meant when he said we're created sick and ordered to be well. That
Mm.
was, I believe, the Church of England hews to that, more or less, at least in letter. Um, the basically everyone right of center still hews to that in the evangelical world of the United States. Um, it's very dark. The theology, it starts with the presupposition that everyone basically has infinite potential for human evil, written inside of them, uh, and only by loving Jesus and having the Holy Spirit working in your life, through your life, are you ever going to amount to anything good and be selected to get into heaven at the end. And the whole thing, like the idea. So the premise, like if we analyze this as like a game, because God's playing some kind of game with us. This is some kind of video game that God is playing, and He needs to have a certain amount of, like, we're His NPCs, he needs to have a certain amount of gaslighting in the game with the NPCs in order for himself to have a satisfying time. So, for example, the differences in physical and health related vulnerabilities between men and women. Like there are many of those in which the disproportion is extreme towards women. It's absurd from an intelligent design standpoint, and I feel like like the Bible starts out with some very rich gaslighting when it says with this just so story that says, hey, everything that's wrong was designed to be wrong a certain way so that God could have a nice time, and it's your fault.
Right.
Now deal with it.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
And I guess, and on the one hand, I say I don't see how anyone can fully understand that and still embrace it instead of saying, what a stupid, horrible God. Why would I want to worship that? And yet I did. I did for like 20 years. And so, even while I say, how stupid could you get? I'm looking at myself when I say that.
well, smarter people than us have backed themselves or talked themselves into uh, much stupider cults. Like, I mean, as you said, they have pseudo intellectualism down to a
Yes.
science.
Yes, they do. They do.
And that they started with a strong foundation. I wanted to comment on Calvin's character again. I don't know if he was a narcissist so much as just a sociopath.
Mm.
I think Martin Luther was more of a narcissist and much less of a sociopath. I think he was blindsided when he saw the depth of human evil that resulted from the peasants' revolt, and his a mighty fortress was his ideology, and it got him through. It got him through witnessing the mess that he made. But Calvin would not have been so troubled by that. I do not know for certain if there were any incidents of witch burning or public execution like that before Calvin's Geneva. I should look into that because that's important. That's where the bookend is on this episode. But John Calvin, perhaps no one was more central than him to starting off this era of where many tens of thousands of people were publicly executed by mobs in order to as basically blood sacrifices or lynchings even. This was normal. This practice was normal in Christianity. There is a verse in the Old Testament that says, if anybody in your family or your friends so much as fucking whispers to you about another god, you need to drag them to the town square and be the first one to kill them.
Yep. Yep.
It says that in the Old Testament, and you can take that in the context of the whole work and treat the whole Bible as literature and anthropology, or you can take it as the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy multiplied by an authoritarian edict. The people get into this for different reasons. They get into it because they're born into it and indoctrinated while they're intellectually vulnerable, or they get intellectually enticed, as you were. And in my case, I was intellectually enticed and emotionally vulnerable.
Okay. Okay.
And I bought into it through my whole teenage years because of the promise of Christian marriage books.
Oh, you were hoping to get a wife as a result?
Well, I was hoping that it would be easy. I was
Okay.
hoping that it would be easy and conveniently centered around me in my straight white male persona, and I mean to own that.
Okay. There's some comments from Bryce Perchett on the chat, and Bryce, I will get to those comments, but I want to address what John Thomas just said here because you have really piqued my curiosity. When you were of that mindset, did you think that once you were married, that your wife would be subject to you, that she would respect you as her husband, that she was to respect your authority, and that you were to rule over her?
I'm glad you asked that. I'm really glad you asked that. And that's an interesting question. So if somebody comes up to you and assigns you the privileged position in the Stanford prison experiment, and then you get to and then that's the next 2 weeks or a month of your life, and you get to do that having already known about the Stanford prison experiment and what the findings and what the consequences of that were, then would you behave any differently? Um, that's what I think of, because to be a man in patriarchal Christianity is to be assigned the privileged position by God in the Stanford prison experiment.
Hmm.
And I bought into it, and so choices in life that I made differently seemed like leaps of faith. They seemed like
Mm.
concrete steps that I could take to affirm my faith and double down on the bet that I was making. And remember, the fundamental reason why I was buying into this, or the reason why I was tempted so much by such a cruel and empty ideology, is that I needed to justify the decision my parents were making in homeschooling, when it was very clear to me that
Mm.
that was the wrong decision, but it was also the decision within my comfort zone.
Hmm.
And I knew that, like, if I remember one time when mom asked me, because I read a book about other kids that had friends,
Hmm.
and I was like, oh shit, kids are supposed to have friends. And and so then I was crying for a few moments, and I went and I decided to share my feelings with my mom, even though I wasn't sure how that was going to turn out. Um, I mean, there was nothing cruel about mom or anything, especially at that point in our relationship, because I was the oldest, and this was before there were too many of us, and so there wasn't very much spanking happening yet. Um, but so she asked me if I wanted to go to school, and at that point I chickened out. I said no.
Mm.
um, and
How old
so
were you?
probably 7 or 8,
Okay.
possibly 9, but I think I would have been 8.
Hmm.
um, so I was basically doubling down on that every step that I took in my Christian walk.
Hmm. Hmm. And how old were you when you deconverted?
I deconverted finally. Of course, it was a graded process, but finally, the summer after I got out of a prominent evangelical Bible college.
Mm. Okay. Okay. Um, Part of the reason I asked you that question is this was a major issue for me, but not an issue that damaged my faith, although it nearly killed me, um, because it nearly drove me insane, which was I viewed my role as a Christian wife and mother as an inferior role to my husband. And my primary duty was to God, and my second duty was to my husband and to my children. And if my husband wanted something and that's not what I wanted, my thoughts and feelings were to be discarded, and my husband's were to be primary. And I blame him some for not noticing how badly things were going. But I blame myself as well for um, not seeing how stupid the religion was, because I felt that I was pleasing God by doing this. And I would tell him once, please don't do that. I don't like that. But if he did it again, then I was, oh, he really enjoys this. I need to suppress my feelings and let his be predominant. And I think you can see where that went. I reached a point where I finally tried to deny my own humanity. And I would get up every morning and tell myself that I am not a person. I have no thoughts and feelings. And what was really interesting was a comment made by my second daughter when she was in grad school. She said, Mom, all through my teenage years, it was like the lights were on, but nobody was home. And that's because that's exactly what I was trying to do to myself. I was trying to turn off my humanity so that I could be sufficiently submissive.
That's so interesting. I'm reminded of a conversation I had with a guy on Twitter the other day. He was trying. I was saying so. Kirk Cameron had James McDonald, who's a disgraced former pastor, on his show. And I don't know if you happen to see this, but anyway, Kirk Cameron completely glossed over all of James McDonald's misconduct and just talked about Jesus, and which is the play. That's the whole game. That's the whole book. And so I took it as an example to make the objection that this is predictable when your whole religion is about total depravity and undeserved forgiveness and eliminating responsibility for consequences.
Mm-hmm.
So if that's the value proposition, if that's the value delivered by your belief system in your day-to-day life, then you're simply not going to take any more responsibility for history than you absolutely have to. You're absolutely not going to impeach your president unless you absolutely have to. If you voted for him, you're going to treat him like he's fucking King David, like he's a warlord who got into his office by some divine right for his fighting skill. And
Absolutely, because the Bible specifically says that.
yeah, and he's going to be flawed and have foibles, but he's going to have a big heart that's in the right place, and God loves him for it. And so all the bloodshed is perfectly fine. It kind of makes God happy. He kind of liked that foreskin thing.
Mm-hmm. Which draws us full circle back to a comment that I wanted to get to eventually, which is from Bryce Burchett. If everything is preordained, it sounds more like we are born sick and then punished for it. Some sects believe that it's already preordained from the beginning of time who will and who will not be saved. Yes, that's exactly the Calvinist doctrine. Which
These are
would
the
mean
droids we're looking for.
yeah, which would mean that some of us were created, brought into being only so that we could be made to suffer for eternity. Exactly. And this is exactly the thing that I bring up with every Calvinist is, why would any loving God create the vast majority of humanity just so it could be tortured for eternity?
Yeah, I mean, you have to go to science fiction. Like if you put that personality in science fiction, then you have shoot.
You have a villain.
Yeah,
You don't have a hero.
like look at Thanos' character arc. He starts out being an ordinary galactic supervillain. He's very strong. He can subjugate a whole ship of Avengers at the beginning when they're not properly teamed up first, and but his aims are really minor. He's just Space Hitler at that point. He's got a crazy theory about ecology and how many people can be in one place, and so it gives him a mission and a certain quota of killing to gratify himself with. You have to assume he's a bit like Dexter. So like is it same for God, except God's on such a higher level, the Calvinist God, because Thanos, he's only Space Hitler at this point. He's only trying to reset things a little bit. He's only trying to impose himself over the universe. He's not trying to destroy it. like he's a rabid Tyrannosaurus Rex that needs to be eliminated. He's not the meteor.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, but then by the end of book three, Thanos has leveled up. He's realized that his plan isn't going to work because other people are more interconnected than he is with his relationships, and so they will always be coming after him for what he's trying to do. They're never going to appreciate what he's done. Um, and so he realizes that what he needs to do is just eliminate the whole universe and start over with a small group of his favorites. And that is when he levels up to Space Jehovah.
Mm-hmm. 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 Now, another point that I bring up to Calvinists is, and even with some Arminians, depending on their view on eternal destination, is how can you know that you were actually one of the chosen ones? You might love and serve God your entire life, but if you were not chosen by God before creation, all of that is for nothing. And I actually asked that question, although worded slightly differently, of my pastor, even back when I was a believer. And the response I got from my pastor was, "Oh, there's just no way that someone can love and serve God and not have been one of the chosen." And I felt very assured by that answer. But now look at me. I spent 42 years of my life loving and serving God. There is no way that you can say that you know that on the day you die, you will still believe.
Yeah, so it's the main thing is it's a confidence trick played with yourself.
Hmm.
Is what it really amounts to. And Calvin understood that. He articulated that. Um, he was not the first. He was a lawyer by training. He was very literate, very very prolific. He wrote an incredible amount, and his writings were hugely influential because they were mass produced and they offered a new politics going forward, which was what a lot of people wanted. Um, and I lost the plot from what you asked.
I was asking about how can a Calvinist know that they are saved? Because at any time they could become convinced that they are wrong and then realize that they were never saved from the beginning. They were never chosen from the beginning.
Yeah, so I think that ultimately it was probably the main place where Calvinists experience doubt from once they have theologically solidified themselves, because you have to realize it's always possible that I could just not be quite as afraid of hell and break out of Pascal's wager for a little bit and then form some non-believing relationships that eventually move my Overton window, my logical Overton windows a little bit around. They're conscious of this sort of thing. They have diagrams of the slippery slope, decorated with various malapropisms. Um, but so this is always possible, and that it's statistically predictable as a
Mhm.
Calvinist. So that there's some chance that you could be wrong, and so your least favorite parables of Jesus. There are a lot of things Jesus says that you're not necessarily a fan of at face value as a Calvinist, uh, but your least favorite are the parables where Jesus implies that there are going to be people at the judgment who are damned, who thought they would be saved, and saved who thought they would be damned, who did not identify as as,
Exactly.
as Christians. So
Mhm.
so so you experience doubt as a Calvinist on the possibility that you could deconvert, and on the possibility that Jesus could turn out to have been less of an asshole, and it was a prank on you this all along.
Um, that brings us to your dilemma, which I'm going to bring up in a minute. But first, I want to address this question from Jeffrey Bozer. Um, can someone believe God revealed something to them and be wrong? Absolutely. And I'm going to give you two examples from my own personal experience. One was, as a believer, my parents were unbelievers, and I kept trying to convince them. And I remember one day on the phone with my mom, and while I was talking to her, I was silently praying, God, give me the words that she needs to hear so that she can believe. What does she need to know so that she will understand God? And I swear I heard in my head a voice telling me, there is nothing that you can say that will convince her. And I was completely convinced that that was a revelation from God. Now, as an unbeliever, I look at that and say, that was my own brain saying, I got nothing, you know. And then the second example is a little bit more interesting. It was a dream that I had. I once had a dream, and this was near the end of my time as a believer. I dreamt that I saw a child that had just died and was in a hospital bed. And I never met the child. I didn't know the child, but somehow I knew that that child was a believer. And a demon came to take that child and take it to hell with it. And I ran up and I started yelling at the demon and telling the demon, you cannot have that child. That child is a child of God. That child is not yours. And as I yelled, an angel appeared, and the angel took the child and took the child up to heaven. And I shared that dream with some friends saying, was this just a dream or was it a revelation? And my friends convinced me that this was more than just a dream. This was a revelation that somewhere some child had died, and I filled some kind of spiritual gap until this child's guardian angel could arrive and take this child to heaven. But now, as an unbeliever, I look at this as how stupid. Why would an angel not be able to come and get this child if there really was such a thing, you know? Why would a demon be trying to steal a child that clearly belongs to God if there was such a thing?
Well, they have authors. They have Christian fiction authors who may have made careers writing books about angelic warfare.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's probably where that dream came from. Mhm.
It's possible, sure, but you know, like the cultural awareness is endemic. It would be surprising if you dreamed a similar story with anything more original.
Hmm.
So yeah, so I appreciated that last question that was posed, and I wanted to say, is it possible for anyone to believe that God revealed something to them and be right?
I'm sorry, ask that again.
Oh, so the question, I forgot who posed it. I apologize, but
That's okay. It was Jeffrey.
Jeffrey posed. He asked, "What is it possible to for someone to hear to think they've got a revelation from God and be wrong?"
Ah.
So I would just
Oh,
say,
okay.
yeah.
Okay.
So is it possible to think that and even be right?
Mhm. Mhm. Well, in order for that to be the case, then God would have to be real.
Yes. Yes. To be determined, I suppose.
Okay, I'm going to bring onto the screen now the the slide that you created. Do you see that?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's probably the most recent version. I'm
Okay.
always trying to make this better.
And yeah, this is a really interesting dilemma. Judgment Day, a dilemma for a faithful Christian. Do you want to read that yourself or do you want me to read it?
Go for it.
Okay. Once you're safe in heaven, what about the folks lost outside? Eternity is a long time to go without a second chance. Do you want them to get one? What would you do if you were in one of their positions? If your sacrifice could make the difference, would you? What did Christ do in this position? Did he give up part of his eternity to save people from ultimate destruction? Do you think he's waiting to see which of you will follow in his footsteps to keep saving? Or is he like a dictator who rewards loyalists and punishes dissenter? Seems like guessing wrong could get you thrown into hell. Seems like you have a choice to make after the judgment. Do you offer yourself to keep saving? Do you keep your mouth shut and count your blessings? What if that is how he sorts sheep from goats? He will put the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. How did you come up with this?
Well, obviously there are conflicted messages from Jesus, from the words of Jesus in the Gospels, and some of them have logically inclusive implications, and Calvinists have always taken those implications and put them in their place and said, yes, that's only in the context of God being an asshole. It's part of the gaslighting. And eventually the moderation in the Church of England in the course of the Reformation, like in the 1800s, there started to be moderate voices of a new sort. At this point, I think by the time of George MacDonald, the British Empire was starting to get rid of slavery. They were quite a ways ahead of us, of the United States, on that. I don't know if there's anybody listening, perhaps from outside the United States, but
most of the people from the UK are in bed by now because it's about 2 o'clock in the morning there. Occasionally, Taram is here, but I haven't seen him today.
Well, to anyone who I have called out just now, thank you and welcome. Welcome to our theological, political musings about the state of our country. So I lost my place. I'm so sorry. I wanted to acknowledge.
It's okay. We were discussing your slide and your dilemma for Christians, and you were relating that to people in the UK, but I wasn't sure exactly where you were going with that.
Yeah, that was a loose historical thread. Anyway, forget that. George MacDonald was a writer in the mid 1800s in the United Kingdom, in England, British Empire at the time, and he was a preacher and a writer of children's stories, and he was a big influence on Lewis Carroll directly, and C.S. Lewis indirectly, and J.R.R. Tolkien indirectly. So he's quite unknown and unappreciated, and the reason for that is undoubtedly because he was a staunch universalist his entire life. And he said, "Look, what are you taking God for? Like, either he's good or he's evil, and if he's good, then that means the logical conclusion of all the predestination and all the ugliness is that the salvation continues until it's done." And so he said a lot more than that, but I think I boiled it down that way. And so, sophomore year of Bible college, my mom happened to say, "Hey, I was on the internet and found some people who said that hell isn't real and everybody gets saved. And you want to take a look at this?" And I don't know why at that point I had enough time on my hands to follow that up, because I would have been quite theologically irritated if I were not perhaps taking an anthropology class at the time. So I was at Bible college, but they had this anthropology department, which is basically just global critical race theory, the Bible college class. And it's like practically undercover because the only people in it are upper class anthropology majors, most of whom have already lost their faith. Not most of whom. That's a little unfair to those who I'm sure remain. But there's a distinct it was quite unsettling to be a sophomore in the class with juniors and seniors, and to be constantly getting their ideological alienation out of their body language. Ideological alienation and disillusionment with the state of world politics post-colonialism.
Okay. Now, were you in a Christian college?
Yes.
Okay.
It was a dry campus. There was a statement of faith with a historical Adam and Eve in it that professors all signed every single year.
Oh,
Uh,
brother.
yes, and all the science professors crossed their fingers when they did so. And I was a geology major, so by the time I was a
Goodness.
junior in there and had been through the summer field camp process, they knew I was there for keeps. So at that point, the professors themselves admitted it. They were like, "Hey, yeah, we told you in intro that there was absolutely no such thing as Noah's flood. We're also going to tell you." There was absolutely no such thing as historical Adam and Eve, but we can still think about them and we can still project them into history and appreciate the narratives as literature and anthropology.
Hmm.
So you're getting all those messages in various forms and various degrees by the time you're an upper class science major, because this is a school that wants to have functional, competent alumni. So they have to employ professors who are not going to misrepresent their fields in order to get ahead professionally,
Hmm.
which is what a more conservative Christian college would offer. All of these schools line up on a continuum of market share.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's important to think about this in terms of marketing as well as politics. Going back to that,
Was chapel required?
absolutely.
Hmm. Um, and was it a young earth believing school?
So I was young Earth when I went there,
Okay.
and I had a sense of alienation from mainstream science, from the young Earth creationism, from the mouth of Ken Ham, probably more than anyone else. Um, Him and his ministry, like all of these extremist organizations have some kind of organizing personality cult at the center.
Hmm.
And Ken Ham, he had enough of a personality cult that I gravitated to enough, and he was prolific enough and present enough. Think of it in terms of marketing.
Hmm.
Um, that he made quite an outsized impression on me, and his worldview did. So I took that to Bible college with me, and I went to that school because I wanted to learn the truth about the faith. I was still doubling down on betting that it would be true, even though I always knew on some level that I was following Pascal's wager. I was rounding a
Hmm.
poor prior probability up to 50% for emotional reasons, and then betting on the 50%.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and so that's a similar kind of moral compromise. Make that a moral compromise instead of an intellectual one, and I think you have the explanation for how someone who has been gaslit enough in their life recently can be perhaps more easily brought into this kind of thinking.
Hmm. Yeah, very much so. For me, the church I went to was on the fence with regards to young earth creationism. And I was the church librarian. In fact, I started the church library from scratch. And I did have a number of Ken Ham's materials in there, but we were kind of neutral on Ken Ham because one thing that my pastor did not like about Ken Ham was that he took the position that anyone who was not young earth was not a Christian. And there were some very respected intellectuals within the Calvinist theology, Wayne Grudem for one, that were
Hmm.
not young earthers. And because Ken Ham could not accept these people as Christians, we kind of relegated Ken Ham to, yeah, you can use his stuff to learn about Genesis, but that's about all he's good for. Don't pay attention to his theology.
Oh my God!
Um,
Talk about a poison pill.
but the thing, and I've told this story a number of times, the thing that broke young earth for me was one thing that young earthers told me was fish cannot grow lungs and then climb out of the water. And then I went to the shed aquarium and I saw
Uh huh.
lungfish.
Uh
And
huh.
I said, What do you mean fish cannot grow lungs? They're right there. Lungfish. These are fish with lungs.
Oh,
And
those fish are only there with lungs because God put them there to be extra amazing.
and as soon as I saw the lungfish, young Earth was out the window for me, and then I was an old Earther.
Oh my gosh, that's fantastic. Okay, so the epiphanies are similar. You know, everyone who breaks their young Earth creationism breaks it probably in a different spot,
Hmm.
but the opportunities for that are endless.
Hmm. Exactly. Hmm.
Because it's so completely false and so
Right.
completely alternative facts from all the way down
Hmm.
down
Hmm.
to the microcosmic level. Like you expand, you blow this worldview up or drill down into it, you will be generating new alternative facts in order to keep going as far as it goes. um,
Okay, go ahead and finish.
no, well, I excuse me. To finish answering like your previous question, like I took geology second semester, freshman year. I wasn't expecting to go into science or be attracted to science anymore. Like, even though I loved all the dinosaurs and had all that from Ken Ham, I also had an antipathy and a mistrust toward mainstream science because it was a threat to my salvation. Because who the fuck knew if Ken Ham was right about that?
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, so like his whole thing was, look, if the Bible's not trustworthy about X, then it's not trustworthy about Y, and then you can't think that you live forever anymore.
Exactly. And I still bought into that at the moment that I lost my faith. Because once I no longer believed the flood, the whole house of cards fell down.
That's so interesting. Yeah, so I was in a place that was designed to let me down easy about that. They've done geology there since the 1800s, and they've been old Earth the entire time, because in fact the young Earth movement is a 19th and 20th century phenomenon. Um, so so they disabused us in. I took geology just as a as an athletics thing, because like I wanted an easy science class so that I could, you know, just not think too much. Um, and so I
And it
did
did
that.
just the opposite.
Well, it did. Like I knew enough background content, enough mislearned from the young Earth creationists that I was able to absorb all the facts pretty readily without having to try too hard, and it was just inconvenient that they all had the effect of destroying my worldview.
Mm, mm.
Um, they told they set apart some time to specifically address the flood in lab, because they knew people were going to have questions about that. About half the students came in with a young Earth persuasion. Um, you know, obviously, probably I don't know if they ever graduate a young Earth senior in some departments.
Mm. Interesting.
Um, yeah, like biology, you know, no way. Maybe applied health science. In fact, they have an applied health science department that's like a parallel. It's like JV pre med,
Hmm.
pre med for people who already are like, yeah, I want to work in healthcare because that's good, because that'll be an easy, cushy job. But I don't want to be a doctor because that would take away the easy part, and so I want to be a nurse instead. So we got all these people who were I think about sometimes. Anyway,
Well, what I was thinking was Georgia Purdom. She's got a PhD in, I believe it's molecular genetics, or it's some area of genetics. And she went to Cedarville University, which is an AIG approved young earth teaching undergrad. And she even says in her own bio that the reason she went for the PhD in genetics was so that she could talk about young earth with the proper credentials. And so she clearly went into her entire grad school program with the intention of paying lip service to what she was being taught, all the while never believing a word of it.
now is Cedarville, was that undergrad for her?
Yeah, that was her undergrad.
Where did she go for the PhD?
I don't remember. It is a reputable school. I'll look it up.
Okay. Well, she's not the only one to have done that. There's Andrew
Right.
Snelling, who's AIG's geologist. Um,
Hmm.
these people, it
Ohio
is
State University, and it's
it's
molecular genetics.
it's only surprising that there are not more of these people, that there are
Mhm.
not enough of these people to staff more than a couple of the most extreme evangelical schools,
Mhm.
because the facts are so bad for what they need to say.
Mhm. Mhm. We're getting close to the end of our time, and there was a comment from Bryce that I wanted to get to that I didn't before. We kind of passed by before I got a chance to bring it up. Let's see if I can find it. Okay, here it is. Um, why do we have to accept Jesus before we die? If we have an eternal soul, what is so special about death? Why not give us a second chance after we die? A human life is a short time to be judged forever for. And Bryce, I'm exactly with you, because this is part of what took me from Calvinism to universalism. Is why does it have to be before you die? And one of the questions that I frequently ask believers is, if you went to your doctor and your doctor told you, and actually you really need to back it up another step. It's not your doctor. You go to a friend and tell him hello, and your friend says, by the way, I have this friend who's a doctor that can do this surgical procedure on you that's going to save you. And you ask them, well, what's the surgical procedure? Is it, well, I can't tell you that. Well, can I meet your friend and talk to them about it? No, you have to agree to the surgery without meeting him. Well, how will I know it's any good? Well, just trust me, and the doctor will put you out, and you'll have the surgery, and when you wake up, you'll be all done. No one would agree to that kind of surgery. If believers were right that God wants you to make an informed decision about him, making a decision before you die for or against a God that you've never met is not an informed decision. You can't truly agree, feel love for someone that you've never met.
And why should love be associated with an authoritarian structure, an authoritarian metaphysic in the universe? Why would the universe be like that? That seems anthropocentric to me. The prior probability of that is quite low. At some point, you have to round up the prior probability that the universe is an authoritarian dictatorship on the outside. You have to round that up to 50%, because first you have to presuppose that there would be a mind behind the universe. Then you have to presuppose that that mind is an asshole patriarch. Um, why would it be like that? Well, it's obvious one reason why it would be like that, because that supports a business model.
Hmm. Hmm. And this is exactly what's wrong with most of the street apologists, like Ray Comfort and Todd Friel, and anyone else that goes out. Yeah, I even had a neighbor recently, when she found out that I had deconverted. She says, "Well, how can you not believe in God? Who do you think created the world?" I don't think anyone created the world. That is so ingrained in them that when you tell them that you're an atheist, they immediately go to, well, then who created the world? Because there's that ingrained assumption that there had to be this who.
Yeah, well, there's so many questions, and some of those questions are emotional landmines for them, and they're trying to ask questions that are not emotional landmines for them in order to challenge you on your atheism, because your atheism is a challenge to what they're thinking. It can't help but be.
Hmm.
Um, yes, I wanted to thank Bryce for his oh, nice. I've got an actual cult leader founder. I that is assuredly a coincidence. I did not know that. Any resemblance to personalities living or dead? Uh, Standard television disclaimer. Um, Thank you for that. Um, No, that's just it. Like the fact is, Christianity is supposed to be about morals, and if it's
Mhm.
about morals at all, then it logically leads to a moral dilemma based on what you expect the character of God ultimately is. Like, what is the fraction of the human persons and other animal persons, if applicable, that were created? What is the fraction of those that are going to be in heaven versus the fraction that are going to be in hell when God turns around and throws away the key? Assuming and even if hell is eternal separation and not eternal punishment, it doesn't matter, because the same failure is still there on God's part. It's a failure of relationship. If he has eternity to work with and all the power in the cosmos, and he can't find it within him to repair the relationship with every last creature given an eternity to work with. And so, like, if we die and find out that we're actually immortal spirits with unlimited potential, at least in terms of time, if not power, then like that changes things. That means that there's no excuse for leaving each other behind. Like the horizons on human solidarity really open up at that point. And if our potential is limitless in terms of time, then we should be cooperating. We should be cooperating much more than we are.
You bring something up that I'm sure you are much too young to know about. There was a series of movies, and it's not the Left Behind series, because this came at least a decade before that.
Late Great Planet Earth.
Yes, yes. Or, well, is it? No, it's not. It was, the first one was A Thief in the Night.
Yes,
And okay, is that Late Great Planet Earth, or is that a different series?
I may be a different series.
Okay.
There's two or three ancestral series in the genre.
Okay. Well, in the book A Thief in the Night, there's this song that it ends with, "And you've been left behind." And it was so powerful.
Hmm.
And I saw that movie as a freshman in college. In fact, that was where I met my husband. My husband and our first date was to go see that movie at a church. Um,
Gods.
and we will be celebrating our 40th wedding anniversary in just a few months. That tells you how old that movie is. Um, so anyway, yeah, that song was extremely powerful. That, you've been left behind. You've got to make a decision for God so you don't get left behind. But they never addressed the point that you just did, is the failure of God to come and find you, to come and get you.
Right. Like, so the question is what kind, the quest. So when you, the C.S. Lewis revision of hell, which is that it's a place of eternal separation from God that's locked from the inside. The vessels God created for destruction are going to lock themselves in the closet and sulk for eternity. He actually writes that, so he paints that scenario at the end of the Chronicles of Narnia. And so it's an interesting admission of defeat on the part of Christian apologetics, because the question that they have not solved the problem of God being an infinitely abusive parent. They've only changed the nature of the abuse.
And I think we could probably go on about this all night, but we are out of time. And so I always like to leave the last couple minutes of the show to allow my guest to give any final thoughts, if we missed anything they wanted to talk about, and to shill for anything that you might want to shill for your favorite YouTuber, or your own works, if you've got anything that you're working on and you want to talk about. So take it away, John.
If you like what I've said, follow me on Twitter for more on a daily basis. Other than that, I would rather do like Hitchens and ask for some more questions.
Okay. Okay, very good. And what I have coming up on in the near future is I will be releasing a produced video this week, which is a response to an episode of Answers News, from Answers in Genesis, obviously, talking about how species just keep popping up all over the place and why we don't need ecology. So that's my produced video. And then next week, I will be doing a live stream on Ukraine. I'm going to a completely different direction, something I normally don't do. And I've asked a couple of service people on. I wish I could get my husband because he's actually an expert on this topic, but this is not his cup of tea, and I get that. So he will not be here. I'm trying to get on somebody else that would be an expert on this topic. Oh gosh, I can't remember his name now, and I had his Starsky. He goes by Starsky.
Yes, I've seen him.
Okay. If anybody knows him, let him know that I am trying to reach him and see if he could be on a panel to discuss the military blunders of the Russian army in Ukraine. So that is what I have coming up.
If you have trouble getting through to him, let me know. I will tweet at him. I've enjoyed much some of his videos.
Okay, great.
I'm sure he's busy. He's active duty over there right now. He's trying to put out like one video a day. I loved the idea, but I suddenly didn't know how practical it would be.
Okay. Yeah. If he's over there, then yeah, the chances of him being able to call in and do a show is pretty low. But oh well, we tried. But I do have Atheist Edge, who's a former Marine, and I do have Uncle Beck, who is, I can't remember which branch of service Beck was, and of course myself, having been an Army wife for 26 years. So that's, and I'll be giving you some of the perspectives that I've heard my husband mention.
So what has been so fascinating to me about this war is that all the strategy, all the PC strategy games that my generation grew up to play are suddenly applicable, and you see different, like, the Russian tanks they are great for leveling. They're great for leveling cities, but they are really bad for withstanding fire from the top. And their ammunition cylinders are easily it's easy to blow up all the ammunition and instantly kill the crew and blow the tank into two completely separate pieces. It's easy to do that, and all of our weapons are designed to do that. And all of their weapons have just been not designed, like they were designed to intimidate the Czech Republic in the 1960s and 70s.
And I had a suggestion from Bo to talk to Fifth Column. I'm sorry, talk to Bo of Fifth Column, and I will look for him. Okay. Thanks everyone for the suggestions.
And thanks for indulging my clumsy nerd rant about the Ukraine situation.
Oh, hey, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on, John Thomas. It has been wonderful getting to know you, and I think you had some very informative insights into the history of Calvinism, as well as some interesting insights into your own experiences with the religion.
Thank you for having me. I enjoy talking about this entirely too much for my own good.
I think I do as well. Okay, with that, thank you everyone in the chat for joining me, and have a great day and live your life.
Thank you.